Today's Cloudcast is sponsored by MongoDB. As a software engineer, chances are you've crossed paths with MongoDB at some point, whether you're building an app for millions of users or just figuring out a side hustle or a new project. As the most popular non-relational database, MongoDB is intuitive and incredibly easy for development teams to use. Now, with MongoDB Atlas, you can take advantage of MongoDB's flexible document data model as a fully automated cloud service. MongoDB Atlas handles all the costly database operations and admin tasks that you'd rather not spend time on, like security, high availability, data recovery, monitoring, and elastic scaling. So go try MongoDB Atlas today. You can visit mongodb.com/cloudcast to learn more.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a good week. I'm going to apologize up front in advance. If my voice sounds like I've been gargling with small pebbles, it is because the Raleigh area has just been overcome with this wonderful, beautiful golden pollen, which will eventually make our landscaping and trees and other things beautiful, but it is just killing me in terms of allergies. So I apologize up front for my voice. It's been a good week. It's been sort of a slow week in terms of news, but there is one big piece of news because this week is Google Next Conference. The Google Cloud Platform holds their annual Google Next Conference. Aaron has had a chance to be out there and attending. We will have a follow-up show that really dives into all the details there. But the one big announcement that'll sort of be the cornerstone of today's cloud news of the week is Google announced what they're calling the Anthos platform. Anthos being their offering, GA offering actually, of a couple of things that they've talked about in the past. So this is them taking both what they called their cloud service platform, which was an announcement they'd made with a couple of different hardware vendors, people like Nutanix and Cisco in the past, I believe VMware as well, to kind of do a multi-cloud type of management. Also brings together what was called GKE on-prem. I think it's still called GKE on-prem, their way of doing a remotely managed on-prem offering. And their big announcement was they're going to extend that out to other cloud platforms. So with the new CEO, Mr. Kurian, now in charge of Google, kind of a much bolder vision that came out of their keynote yesterday, much more enterprise-y version. We'll get into more details about that in subsequent shows when Aaron's back, and we'll do a show about that. But the Anthos offering is kind of becomes the umbrella brand for all of their both public cloud and on-cloud or on-prem offerings. And then being able to, as they claim, be able to manage these types of offerings across different clouds. So we'll see how that kind of sorts itself out. But essentially, it is a set of services. They're all very container and Kubernetes centric. So it's not the full blown set of Google Cloud services. It's really Kubernetes or GKE type of services, trying to bring VM applications to containers. So some migration services that come out of the Velostrata acquisition, as well as some work they do around the Istio service mesh, and then the CI/CD build tools that go along with it. So we'll have some links in the show notes for folks that may have been just hearing about this, but that was really the big news that came out of day one of the Google Cloud Next event. And as we're recording this the day of, we're going to try and get you that. So that's kind of the big news. It really aligns with what's going on in the industry around multi-cloud, around hybrid cloud, whether you're talking about IBM's pending acquisition of Red Hat in terms of hybrid cloud, AWS looking at building out Outpost as a sort of multi-cloud hybrid cloud offering, Azure with Azure and Azure Stack, and then lots of different partnerships that get announced as a part of this, whether they are ecosystem partners to try and make it better or different ways of partnering to go to market. So going to wrap up this week's Cloud News of the Week. Big thank you, as always, to our sponsors, both MongoDB Atlas and Datadog, for sponsoring the show. And with that, we're going to get to a very interesting interview looking at kind of how the SRE concept, the DevOps concept, is being extended out to networking and infrastructure teams. So look forward to that. Hey, Cloudcast listeners, before we get to today's show, I want to talk to you about today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Datadog. Now, we've been talking about Datadog for a while now. It's the monitoring platform for cloud-scale infrastructure and applications. But did you know that Datadog seamlessly integrates with your AWS environments, so you can start monitoring EC2, RDS, ECS, and all your other AWS services in minutes. You can visualize key metrics, set alerts to identify anomalies, and collaborate with your team to troubleshoot and fix issues fast. So if you want to figure out how Datadog can help your AWS environment. Try it yourself for free by starting a free 14-day trial today. If you go to datadog.com/cloudcast, not only can you start your free 14-day trial, but you get a free Datadog t-shirt. So go out to datadog.com/cloudcast, sign up for your free 14-day trial, start monitoring your AWS environment, and get your free t-shirt. And now, on to the show. And we're back. And, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking to the folks from Google about SRE, sort of the concept of SRE. Obviously, we've talked about DevOps and a lot of people have asked about SRE and so forth. And, that topic tends to be very compute-centric. I know sometimes it gets talked about as infrastructure-centric. But a lot of times the comments will come back at some point and they'll say, well, that's cool for compute because compute has, concepts like VMs and containers and all this stuff. But what about, for the other part of infrastructure, things like security and storage and in particular networking? So, today we're going to dive a little bit into sort of the networking side of what the, I guess SRE DevOps side of the world looks like. And for that, very excited to have both Matt Oswalt, who has been on the show before, and Derick Winkworth, who's now joining us for the first time, both from Juniper. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's awesome to be here.
Matt, you've been on the show before. Derick, it's your first time. So, just for audience, both, so we get a chance to know the different voices, but also your backgrounds. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then ultimately, how you got to be working on this new NRE stuff over at Juniper.
Yeah, sure. Derick and I work on the enterprise marketing team, which is odd. If you've seen us and if you heard me on the last show, you'll be like, what? Why is Matt in marketing now? It's kind of a unique situation. Very cool, actually. Just because of some of the people that brought us on board, we actually get to work still on very technical things to enable some of the things that are on Juniper's plate from a marketing perspective. One of which we'll talk about. It's a sort of an open source initiative we've started. From that perspective to help move some of these ideas forward. But it's kind of cool. Like we're working on like making sure that the industry as a whole is ideally, adopting a lot of the things we're throwing down. We've noticed some mismatches between what the perception is, like the hype of where automation is, and then we look at statistics from Gartner that say things like, data center network operations are still like 80% CLI driven. And that's the data center, by the way. That's not branch and remote sites, which is arguably worse. And so we have to. We're working right now on trying to reconcile how it is that we have been talking about automation for 10 years and yet largely, clearly based on the data, have failed. And so that's what we're working on. Me as an engineer in the marketing team, like that's the kind of stuff I like to work on. But I'll let Derick sort of talk about his background a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've been a network engineer and a software engineer on and off throughout my career, which has been I'm glad that I did that because it's opened a lot of doors for me, I guess, having both skill sets. And I started up way back out. I joined the Air Force in the 90s as a satellite communication systems programmer. That was my title. Eventually ended up working in a variety of industries. Like I did disaster recovery at SunGard. Then I worked at a service provider on very large MPLS networks. And then I ended up in the financial sector working for what is now Fidelity Information Systems. And probably around 2012, I started thinking a lot about automation, having some software engineering background, and I started blogging about it, and I started questioning a lot of, how networking was, the state of networking at that time, and wrote a very angry blog on Packet Pushers. I was very frustrated with something that was going on with this network solution I was developing. It was called Network Interrupted on Packet Pushers. If you ever want to go read it. And subsequently became known as Cloud Toad on Twitter. And no one, even my non-tech friends in real life here in my town now call me Toad. So from there, I ended up, going to the dark side. I ended up working for a variety of network vendors over the last few years. And now, as Matt said, I'm on the the marketing team and at Juniper as an engineer, which is weird and different, but also awesome. It's I think marketing teams should have engineers on their teams because it's invaluable. Like there's never ending work for us to do, and there's a lot of insight we can help marketers with when they're putting together stories and collateral and stuff like that, and communicating what products do and features do to our demographic.
Right. Yeah, no, and I think the thing about it is with so much technology coming out so frequently, and quite honestly, the stuff is pretty complicated. A lot of these things come out of open source, or they come out of somewhere, one of the web scale companies maybe as an open source project, or conceptually people are trying to do those things. So I find myself that the product managers and even some of the marketing teams across a lot of different companies are having to become much more technical in order to be kind of considered legitimate. People are learning more stuff on their own, and they go to the vendor websites or the project websites, and they expect them to be very technical. So you need people that not only have a lot of hands-on background, can still get hands-on with stuff, but then also have the communication skills to do that. So whether it's blogs or podcasts or whatever it is, it's become an interesting combination. So it's very, very good to have both of you guys on today. Like I mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about SRE, and a lot of the feedback that we got from people was, what about the network? Obviously, like you both mentioned, we've been hearing about network automation for a long time. There have been different approaches to doing that, whether it's things that are built into the networking tool sets or things like Ansible or other things. But you guys have kind of started this new concept, or at least the concept was new to me, which is NRE, or Network Reliability Engineer. Give me the background of kind of why you got started with it and what it is for anybody who maybe is unfamiliar with it like myself.
Yeah, I'll start. This is kind of funny, actually. It's sort of the holy grail from a marketing perspective, right? Because actually we did not come up with the term. We're certainly probably one of the more vocal voices about it. But the reason we've jumped on NRE is actually because we originally heard a lot of our customers talking about it. We heard specifically like some of our customers in like the gaming industry and some of the other like large enterprises, places that I wouldn't expect actually, that are not immediately like, they're not Google, they're not Facebook, they're not those companies. We actually started to see some of our sort of regular, average Joe kind of customers talking about it. And so, obviously they, their goals are to run their businesses. And so they're not really doing a lot of evangelism there. But we noticed like they're pulling onto this message of an NRE, not because, they want to do anything, something different. Mostly it's a matter of, look, a lot of the philosophy behind SRE is good. A lot of it can be scaled down to the average enterprise. But the problem is just in the name, the nature of where I think the networking industry is. If we have like if the average network engineer gets a sense, even catches a whiff that the topic that you're talking about, that you're proposing that they adopt things like DevOps, like SRE, if they catch a whiff of like, oh, that's for the hyperscalers, or oh, that's for developers or application folks, even if this isn't the case, they tend to think, well, that's just not for me because that's not my world. Even though those of us that have done this kind of stuff like in production, we know that that's not the case. We know that the network team is included in these philosophies, but it's difficult to see through the noise and the hype if you're busy putting out fires. And so one of the reasons we jumped on this message, we heard customers talking about this, and the main reason we're really working on evangelizing it is to effectively provide this like really inclusive bridge between the world of networking and all of the benefits of the philosophies of DevOps and SRE. It's effectively the same sort of key principles, just with a different coat of paint to make it more applicable to what most network engineers deal with in their day-to-day. Yeah,
for sure. One of the reliability piece is worth expanding on a little bit. When a lot of people outside of networking don't really understand just how fragile networks are, and the systems that they're built with are. Once you find Cisco, there's operating systems that run on switches and routers and firewalls, and it's iOS on a Cisco router, and it's Junos on a Juniper switch, et cetera. Arista has EOS, and there's Cumulus, right? There's all these, and those releases tend to be very buggy and very fragile, right? And one of the things that we realized at Juniper is like, we need to be honest about this. And when you go to when I've done this in front of like huge like groups of people, I say, think of 3 words to describe your network. And I have never to this day ever had someone say reliable. Like that's not a word that comes up. Like if a new version, and just to hammer on that point, if a new version of Junos comes out, nobody thinks to themselves, well, I'm going to load this up on a production device and see what's new. Because if they did that, they would get fired. I mean, you just don't do that, right? Once you have a stable version of an operating system on those devices, you tend to stick with that until greater forces, force a change. So going to network engineers and saying, this is about reliability, right? Ultimately, what we're saying is automation is about reliability, and that really clicks with them. That makes them open their eyes. It's not about going faster. It's not about eliminating your jobs. It's about helping you be more reliable in what you do.
Yeah, and that always seems to be the thing that's sometimes tough for people to connect the dots with. It's doing this stuff that is making changes will actually make you more reliable. Doing this stuff that's making changes will make you more secure, easier to audit. And it's it's one of these things that, like, for so long, people around networking have been like, yeah, but it's better when it just works. I'll leave it alone. And so I totally get it. The other thing that I can kind of appreciate, because I know in reading through the things that you guys have been putting together, you're also kind of leveraging this concept of DevNetOps, right? So sort of this combination of networking and DevOps. And before people kind of get too hung up in going like, okay, these guys are just going to, like you said, talk about a fresh coat of paint on something. I can't tell people like how many customers that I'll end up talking to who are like, look, I know some of that stuff seems semantic, like we're creating a name or we're doing it. But there are times when you're like, look, I'm trying to invoke change. I'm trying to make things better. And if you're always calling stuff by the same name, or you don't sort of align yourself to stuff that people could go Google to figure out what you're talking about, like, it's kind of important. I mean, it is almost the value of like internal marketing of we're trying to make changes. And I have to make something that stands out that makes you go like, oh, what is that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can ask the guy that Derick and I both report to, you can ask him. I actually pushed back on initially the NRE term, and DevNetOps was something we were playing with as well. We've kind of stopped doing that as much. But just generally, tacking on the word net to these terms, it kind of makes you cringe, right? Like, it made me cringe. That was where I was at when I first started. I was like, ugh, we got to, come up with a new term. Why don't we just, why do we keep effectively forking off into these other terms? But I think, again, there is value. There's immense value in a name. There really is. Yeah. And I think like, especially like I said, even like the term DevNetOps, just given that I've been like talking to people about this for a year, just looking at that, I'm seeing the dev portion of that. And this is one of the reasons we don't use that specific term as much, because even though there's net in the name, there's also dev in the name. And so like most network engineers are like, well, dev, I'm off. Like immediately my brain is switched off, because it's like I inadvertently have been declassified from this conversation. Now it's, you have to be a developer to participate. I don't consider myself a developer, therefore I'm shut off to the whole thing. And that's a shame, because like the messaging behind something like that might be exclusively for a network engineer, but it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? If it's not explicitly in the names, something that resonates with the individual, it's just not going to be effective. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think NRE is a better term. Again, not because it's new or because it's like a sexy, like different way of looking at this, but because first off, like the N and the E, that's network engineering. Like that, you can't get away from the fact that in the name, I'm included in this change effort. And then to Derick's point, like reliability, like that is the point of automation. It always has been. It's just that we're being explicit about it. And then I think the third really cool benefit is that you can't buy engineering. Like we've found ourselves in a place where like you can buy DevOps, even though that sounds ridiculous. Like that's what some people think, but you can't buy engineering. You just can't. It's in the name. Like you have to do engineering, and that's what we're all about.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it makes sense. I mean, you can't really call it like, PowerShell DevOps, or you can't call it, Python DevOps or anything along those lines. But you're right. There is a certain level of like when you put things out there for people that, that sort of scare them on first blush, you'll chase people off. So let me ask this question. So we've been talking a lot about sort of kind of positioning this and changing mindsets. Let's talk tangibility. You guys have put some stuff together. You've been talking about it. You mentioned you've been getting into this for a year plus, but like, if somebody goes like, okay, I'm curious, like what are the tangible things behind what you're talking about? What have you built? Is there code behind this? Are there things people can go learn about, to kind of dig into seeing if this makes sense for them?
Yeah. So we're, I'll take, well, I think there's two pieces to that question. So we have, actually, I'll let Matt talk about the NRE Labs website, and I'll say something about, you said earlier, are you just putting another sort of pane of code on the same thing? And the answer to that is no. We're approaching this from the perspective of reliability. So if you go outside of network engineering and to any other engineering field, I love to give this example. My neighbor is a control systems and materials engineer, and he builds systems, right? There's just not systems that we're familiar with, but like, have furnaces and control systems and PLCs and all this stuff, right? And before he ever turns the switch on the very first time, he knows what every measurement is supposed to be for every single component in that system. And he is taking measurements from the very moment he turns that thing on. He knows ahead of time exactly how that system should behave and how to measure and test it, right? And all of that is automated. And we need to adopt that as network engineers, right? It's being adopted. That's what site reliability engineering is, really incorporating a lot of stuff from outside of tech into tech, proven methods, right, for approaching automation, and we want to bring that to network engineering, and that's kind of new, right? Like, how do you measure if the network is operating correctly? I mean, you can ping, but is that really it's a very complicated system. Is that really a suitable measurement, right?
Right.
So we want to completely change, and it comes down to test-driven sort of, a test-driven approach. You start with defining how you think the system should be behaving, and how it's measured, and then writing tests for taking and evaluating those measurements early on in the process, if not the very first thing you do. So that's fundamentally the difference, right? And we know that this is a new way of thinking about it. So I'll let Matt take over from here. So we want to evangelize this. We want people to get involved, and so we have done something really awesome. Matt, you want to take over?
Yeah, sure. So to Derek's, actually to Brian, your earlier point where you said like a lot of this stuff is complicated. Like, there's no doubt that that's true. I think that we're at the point now in the industry where we, like I said in the very, very beginning of this call, where I mentioned adoption is still really low, and we have to think about why. Like, why is it the case that, 10 years after almost 10 years after the Nicira acquisition, which pains me because it makes me feel old, but almost 10 years after like SDN really first started getting kicked off in earnest, how is it that we're still so very CLI driven, box by box? Basically hack and slashing your way through your how is it that we're still here? And I think I don't think the problem is a motivation problem. People outside of networking, or maybe people that aren't in the weeds, they like to think, network engineers, they're set in their ways and they just don't like to change and whatnot. I don't think that's fair. I think the real thing that needs to be considered is do we have sort of, to the book switch, like, do we have a path that is unobstructed? Have we given people specific things to do, like specific and tangible and prescriptive things to do, instead of just saying, well, adopt DevOps and that's it. Like, that's not helpful. Like, we need to be prescriptive. I think the problem is we've created a lot of barriers, accidentally. Like we've created so many barriers just by virtue of the fact that this space is complicated. And in many ways, you have to be an expert in automation in order to learn automation. I'm guilty of this. I've done talks and workshops where I'm like, hey, learning Ansible is really easy. Just make sure you have Vagrant installed. And, oh, by the way, you got to have Git patched to this version because of this bug. And oh, by the way, like you got to use these scripts and you got to know how Python works. Like, it's all over the place. You end up having to learn like the thing you want to learn. You got to spend 90% of your time over the next like 3 months just getting the environment prepped, which is usually its own research activity in and of itself, which is unacceptable. And I think if you think about automation being that for most network engineers, who, by the way, are busy fighting fires most of the time, it's not really a surprise why we're at the place where we're at. So the question is, how do we solve these barriers? Like, how do we get these barriers to be taken down? Like, how do we reduce the complexity of people picking up these skills, or at least getting some basic experience with the different tools that are in this space, the different methodologies, sort of what Derick was saying, like, how can I get ahead of the problem and start doing things like test-driven network operations instead of like, well, I made a change at 3 a.m. and I'm going to ping that dusty server and it looks like it's pinging, so I'm going to go home. Like, how do we move beyond that? While placing as little burden on the learner to spend an inordinate amount of time learning these things. So this is, just one of the things we're working on. There's a bunch of things we're doing, like from our channel partners perspective, like putting my Juniper hat on, there's stuff we're doing there, but taking my Juniper hat off, like one of the things that Derick and I have been very passionate about is like providing something tangibly to help with this adoption problem. And for sure, Juniper's paying us to do this, but one of the things that we've been doing is we've been working on this open source project called Antidote, but we've created an instance of it called NRE Labs, which is a website. And it's really cool. Like I said, the open source project that sits behind it makes this possible. But if you think about NRE, about the learning experience that's needed, where you say, my earlier example, hey, I need to learn Ansible, but in order to learn Ansible, I need to learn like these 5 other things just to get the environment right. Like, what if that wasn't the case? What if you could get dropped off right at the point where you're ready to learn the thing you wanted to learn, but you don't have to sacrifice like you don't have to make sacrifices in terms of interactivity. I think this is one of the cool things about blog posts. Like, I'll blog about like, Ansible 101, for instance, but that's not very interactive. It's very easy. You don't need to have anything installed to read a blog post, but it's also not very interactive. What if you didn't have to make that choice? What if you could interact with everything that you needed to interact with all in the web browser, but you didn't have to set anything up yourself? You just simply went to the page, just like you would go to a blog post. So that's what we've enabled with the Antidote project, and NRE Labs is one specific curriculum that we're working on to help folks adopt network reliability engineering principles and network automation skills and tools.
So this sounds a little bit like so I was at Cisco for a long time, Cisco CCIE years and years and years ago. And one of the biggest things when I left that world where everything was sort of iOS or whatever OS it was at the time, you were like, what are all these Linux commands and other stuff, right? And the kind of sysadmin side of the world, the compute side of the world has solved this a little bit, right? So there's things like Homebrew, so it'll install a whole bunch of stuff on your machine without you knowing things. We're seeing more and more like IDEs built into web browsers so that you don't have to set up development environments. I mean, it sounds a little bit like that's kind of the concepts that you guys are trying to get at, which is like, don't worry about all those packages you have to install. Just kind of come to this thing and start working. Is there like an analogy? Is that sort of somewhat similar?
Yeah, totally. In terms of the user experience, yeah, for sure. Like one of the things that we wanted to solve for was just getting all of the complexity of having your environment set up, like taking that off of your plate. And basically, and not even just like setup activities, but anything that distracts from the learning at hand, we take care of on the back end. Like I said, it's done with the software that we built on the back end, and then of course the NRE Labs site, since it's powered by this software, we've just sort of put up a site as an example. Anything that you can imagine that might distract from learning the thing. So I need to run Ansible against these 3 network devices. Well, you got to figure out how those network devices are booted. You got to get them running in the cloud or in a hypervisor. You have to make sure they're connected together. You have to have them configured to be a viable target for what you're trying to automate. Maybe you're trying to troubleshoot something. Maybe it's not a config management thing you're trying to learn. Maybe you just need a running lab that has a problem that you need to go fix with tool X. all of that setup burden is non-trivial. Even just for one exercise. Never mind if you're trying to like learn never mind if you're like trying to dive in with 2 feet and like learn the gamut of tools that are out there. It's non-trivial. And so, yeah, anything we can do in terms of like not only reducing the setup burden, but I'll give an example. There's a lesson that we have in NRE Labs where you learn a project that we have called JSnappy, which is a sort of a testing project that you can write unit tests for your network, basically. And part of that lesson is validating that your BGP configuration is there. Now, naturally, because of our audience, we would hope that you know how to configure BGP. It's sort of the nature of being a network engineer. But nevertheless, that task, configuring BGP to match the lesson is a distraction. It's not what you're coming here to learn.
Right.
So even that stuff we take off of the plate. So if you can think of Antidote as like a project or a platform for reducing not only barriers, but also distractions from the task at hand, that was sort of why we built what we built. And it's certainly how we constructed the NRE Labs curriculum.
Yeah, no, I love the concept. I mean, I know, one of the things that we do a lot, like when I'm over here at Red Hat, we work with a company called Katacoda that builds similar types of things. Like, hey, you want to learn Kubernetes, but you don't want to go find a bunch of boxes and do stuff. It's like, hey, just come here, fire up the web browser, and here's kind of structure for dealing with Kubernetes. And, the expectation is, yeah, you're going to learn that stuff, but yeah, all the stuff behind the scenes is kind of goes away. So as you guys are getting feedback on this, both the concept of NRE, the Anecdote project, NRE Labs, like what are some of the learnings that you've heard from people in terms of how it's helped them learn, or things where they've gone like, oh, we thought we were supposed to do this, on our journey and evolution, but we kind of failed. Like what are some of the learnings or failings you've sort of heard over the last year around this space?
Oh man, that's a big question. A lot of times when network engineers try to get in like an automation practice going, the two things they struggle with the most are with tooling, dependencies, both from a like a package level, at the operating system,
Yep.
But also like, you download something from GitHub and there's dependencies, and they struggle with that sometimes. Like, well, I can't get it. I don't know how to get this version of this library, right? That's a very common thing. Or they'll, the thing is, a lot of network engineers they're very smart. They can have all of this very complicated stuff in their head about how they're not, every protocol in their network and how it's working and what the relationship is up and down the layers in the network. They know all of this information, right? But they're not devs. So I'll give you a very simple one that was kind of, eye-opening. We had someone actually say there's other, sort of network development communities out on the web, and they were going through a tutorial on one, or they intended to over lunch. And when they went to go get started, the very first thing that tutorial said was, in order to get started with this tutorial, you need to get an API key for the API. And they just completely, they said, well, I'm going to go eat lunch.
Right.
And sit at a table. They had no idea how to do that. And, it's like, oh man, that's.
Yeah. And it's funny, like this is a trivial exercise for those in this space, but I don't think I think people still don't really truly get how divergent these two disciplines, and not even just networking, this is true of a lot of other disciplines in IT, but just how divergent the skill sets have become over the past even 5 to 10 years. And this is a good example of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did a show, I don't know, it was a year ago. It was basically like, how do you talk to an API? And it sort of started from like, what if you have no clue? Like, how do you talk to that thing? What do you need? So yeah, it sounds trivial. It sounds simplistic if you've lived on the development side of things. And if you've lived on the network or operation side, you may be like, yeah, I don't want to tell anybody I don't know how to deal with that, but I don't have any clue.
Yeah, I mean, like just take the reverse example. Like ask your average JavaScript developer to add an access list entry to a router.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not that they can't do it because they're stupid. Obviously, that's not the case. It's just that it's not their world.
Right.
You know what I mean? They could figure it out if they, were left to Google for a day or two, but it's just not their world. I think people's expectations of how different these different skill sets have become is important to recognize. And part of what we're doing is, obviously we're not trying to, we're not making the argument that network developer or network engineers need to be developers. That's not the point. The point is to provide a shared experience. The point is to have an environment where it's like, okay, yeah, our worlds are different. And at the other end of this experience, I'm not going to go become a developer. Most people, that's what I did, but most people don't do that. And similarly, developers aren't going to be like, wow, I feel like being a network engineer now. Like that doesn't happen. So it's not about that. It's about providing a shared experience. And recognizing that even though we have sort of divergent skill sets, we can still meet in the middle and talk about some similar stuff.
Yeah, no, I think it's really valuable. Like you said, there is a divergence. There will probably always be some amount of divergence, but we're going to see new generations of people coming into the industry. People talk about sort of full stack engineering. Maybe at some point people will talk about like half stack engineering, and it'll just be the automation of things. But even still,
I think Brian just invented a buzzword.
There we go.
Yeah.
Half stack engineering. You guys can.
There we go. You get credit.
but I mean, just we've said for a long time there. You need to sort of learn even the most basic things of the other person's world. Things like source control, how to do testing, how to use things like Jenkins and CI. It's like because they could be very valuable to you. I mean, because at the end of the day, we're no longer dealing with proprietary hardware, no longer dealing with proprietary OSs. It's stuff that you can integrate because they're fairly common. So it's very, very cool that you guys are working on this stuff. I'm glad to have learned about it. We're kind of running out of time a little bit. If folks want to dig into this stuff more, we'll have a lot of links in the show notes, but just kind of, simple pointers for people. What are good places to go either find out about it or pick your guys' brains?
Sure. I'll give the gamut of like resources, and then Derick, I'll let Derick drive it home with some of the things we're working on in the near term. First off, the NRE Labs site, as I mentioned, that's just one. It's sort of like our golden curriculum that we're being paid to develop. And so that's why we put that out there. So that's labs.networkreliability.engineering. And yes, try not to be too envious of the fact that I have a .engineering domain. That I know it's pretty cool.
Nice.
And then so obviously anything. One of the things that I want to reemphasize is this actually is not a Juniper effort. They're paying us to work on this because we feel like this is one of those things where if we help the industry, we still benefit clearly. But we don't have to like Juniper brand it and make it a whole sales thing in order to accomplish that goal. And so it's not a Juniper branded thing. It's totally open source. It's actually totally free. You don't have to sign up to use it. You literally just go to the page that I mentioned earlier, labs.networkreliability.engineering, and you're in. That's the whole point.
Cool.
Yeah. We can't emphasize that enough. A lot of people hear, oh, well, we're from Juniper, and therefore it's some kind of Juniper marketing thing, right? They just do that immediately, and there is no marketing wall. We don't even know who's using the website. You just put in the URL and then click on a lesson, and it happens. No tracking, other than there's a UUID that's tracked for the purpose of tracking your time with a particular lesson. But it collects nothing from your system, and it's open source. You can see what the cookie's doing. It's just an identifier to mark that you're doing this lesson in case your browser closes out or you have to reboot your machine or something like that.
It's just like a persistence thing.
You can go back to your lesson, but there's no marketing wall whatsoever. In fact, some of the things that we're working on are we're soliciting, and right now we're talking with a number of other companies and projects to contribute lessons to this site and contribute to the to the back end framework that drives it. So like companies and projects that people would think are our competitors, and we're not announcing that just yet because we just sort of started this over the last few months. But this has always been our objective is to make it vendor neutral, mainly because for Juniper, it's pretty rare for us to have customers that are entirely Juniper in their network. In fact, I've never seen that myself, right? I'm sure there are some small networks that are entirely Juniper, but when any network that's scaled, that has a data center and campus and all these different things, is almost invariably multi-vendor. So it's always been the intention of the site to do that. So we will have lessons coming from other organizations, open source projects, other networking companies. That's coming down the line. Yeah, in fact, there's other just sort of network engineering media sites. Again, I don't want to get into. We're talking with a couple of different ones that are sort of hubs for network engineers to go and see what kind of new things are coming out and what other network engineers are doing. A couple of those sites we're talking to get like a partnership going. And in general, we're building the community. That's at least that's what I'm currently working on. But we have, we have a lot of stuff in the pipeline in terms of lessons and community events. We're going to be doing a hackathon pretty soon. Multiple hackathons in Europe and in the States to get people jump started and how to contribute and
it's all on GitHub. Like if you want to contribute, like all of the curriculum that we run is on GitHub as well. Not just the software that we run, it's also the curriculum. So I'll put it in the show notes for you, Brian, but github.com/NRE-learning/antidote is sort of the hub for a lot of what we do in the open source space. So yeah, I think the long and short of it is this isn't something that we're just trying to do where we educate the industry of automation. That's not really the point.
Right.
We're creating this as a loudspeaker for others to project their own experience. We'll participate there, but it's much more than just a Matt and Derick or a Juniper show.
Yeah. No, I like it. I like the premise behind it. Obviously, having sort of lived through that transition myself, we talk to people that are still struggling with it, but I like the community approach to it. It lets new ideas come into it. Like you guys said, there's stuff you're working on, but isn't kind of baked out yet. People can reach out to you. They can see if they want to get involved. They can find out what's going on. So I like it. Very, very cool stuff, folks. All this stuff will be in the show notes, so you'll be able to go find it. If you're interested in the NRE concepts, if you're interested in the software behind it, or you just want to reach out to either or Matt or Derick, who are very, very open to talking to people, have been around the industry for a long time, lots of experience. So guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for educating me and educating the audience on this thing. I know, kind of the RE topic, whether it's NRE or SRE is becoming very, very interesting to people. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up for both Matt and Derick and for Aaron and myself. Everybody, thank you for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for rating the show on iTunes, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.